I knew something was wrong the moment I saw the name Evo Tech Solutions slapped across the procurement file like a bloodstain no one wanted to clean. No tax ID, no listed employees, and their headquarters was a shuttered Payless shoe source in Dayton. But somehow, they were the primary subcontractor on a $42 million federal infrastructure build. I printed out the contract, highlighted the missing fields, and walked it straight to my manager's office, thinking naively that truth still mattered in this place. He barely looked up, just waved his hand and said, "Don't nitpick, Karen. You know how these contracts are, fast-tracked, that vendors cleared." Then he went back to whatever spreadsheet he was pretending to understand. I stood there with the file in my hand like it was radioactive. It felt like I'd just discovered a leaking barrel of sludge in a daycare sandbox and been told to trust the process. That was 5 years ago, before I realized that compliance in our office was just a PowerPoint slide for board meetings. That red flags weren't signals to stop, but decorations for the company's bonfire of due diligence. And before I understood that the founder, Greg Marsh, our beloved visionary, was less interested in staying legal than he was in staying adored. Anyway, I get it. You're busy. But if you're already sucked in, do me a solid, hit that like button, maybe subscribe too. 95% of folks who listen never do, but it really motivates the team. Plus, you'll want to see how this all burns down. Trust me, back to Evo Tech. That vendor wasn't just shady, they were a ghost. No tax filings, no W-9, no digital footprint besides a Wix website that still had lorem ipsum in the footer. I flagged it, filed a formal review request, and got a pat on the head in return. HR even suggested I take a restorative day to manage my stress. That's when I started printing everything. I bought a cheap safe from Home Depot, drilled it into the floor of my garage, and began my private archive. Not just copies of the worst files, but timestamps, access logs, names of who approved what when. I called it Sequence X at first as a joke, like some spy movie folder you stumble across with a soundtrack by Hans Zimmer and CIA operatives swarming a compound. But the joke started to wear off around year 2, when things got darker. Because Evo Tech wasn't a one-time fluke. It was the first breadcrumb on a trail that wound through dummy vendors, padded invoices, and expedited procurement partners with LLCs filed 3 weeks before contract award. I started noticing patterns: last-minute swaps right before submission, vendor names accidentally changed during edits, and approval stamps issued without timestamp reviews. Our internal review system, Complipro, was supposed to log every change, but when I checked one file's history, the entire log had been scrubbed. Gone. I asked our IT lead, Brett, about it. He chuckled like I'd asked him if clouds were made of marshmallows. "Karen, logs clear every quarter." "Space issues," he said, sipping his third Red Bull for the morning. "That's not in our protocol," I said. He leaned back in his chair, cracked his neck, and said, "Maybe update the protocol then." You ever feel like you're the only sober person at a drunk driving contest? By year 3, I'd stopped trusting anyone in the top 5 floors. The founder was busy pitching himself as a contract whisperer to Forbes. Our COO was too busy perfecting his spray tan to read a P&L. And our director of compliance, my own boss, spent more time tweaking his golf handicap than checking our procurement partners. It was all smoke, mirrors, and quarterly bonuses tied to volume, not accuracy. And me, I kept filing. I kept backing up. And I kept watching. Because deep down, I still believed someone would care. That maybe if I just gathered enough evidence, if I just documented the rot correctly, someone with a badge would finally knock on the door and ask, "Can you walk me through this?" So I waited. And the file grew. And then one day I saw a name I thought I'd buried years ago, and everything changed. It was a Tuesday, which meant nothing, really, except that Tuesday was the day we were supposed to send our monthly compliance digest to the Federal Oversight Portal. I'd spent 2 weeks assembling that thing. Contract flow audits, vendor cross-checks, procurement anomalies, whistleblower summaries, all wrapped in a tidy PDF labeled Cobalt Compliance July. It was the kind of report that, if anyone actually read it, would have stopped the presses. I uploaded it at 4:46 p.m., right before shutting down my terminal and heading home to reheat leftover lasagna and yell at my dishwasher. I even got the confirmation email, upload successful. Timestamp 4:47 p.m., it was done. It existed, it was proof, or so I thought. By morning it was gone, vanished, not just missing from the shared compliance drive, erased. No version history, no cache, no local copy on my machine, just a black hole where a hand grenade used to sit. I walked into my manager's office, Rick, a man whose leadership style could best be described as shrug-based. "Hey," I said, holding up the blank folder view on my tablet, "the July Cobalt Compliance Report is missing." He blinked, then sipped his lukewarm coffee like it had betrayed him personally. Probably got overwritten. Happens sometimes. File sync issues. Overwritten. Like the 26-page report just accidentally yeeted itself into the ether, and the system said, "Oops, my bad." "Rick," I said, "the audit digest is required by federal oversight. I submitted it at 4:46 yesterday. There's no overwrite log, just nothing." He leaned back, laced his fingers behind his head like a Gotham Cruise director, and smiled. You're overthinking again. We're gonna be fine. No one reads those things anyway, and that's when I knew. Not suspected, knew, someone deleted it, on purpose. And they weren't even trying to hide the fact anymore. That's how you know rot's fully set in. And people stop bothering with excuses and just shrug you into silence, so I stopped talking. I stopped submitting, and I started checking the logs. The one thing the idiots hadn't figured out yet, every file deletion left a fingerprint. If you knew where to look, and if your clearance was high enough, you could pull the deep audit logs, not the ones they show you in the UI. I'm talking the buried system-level logs that record everything, including deletions, overrides, access attempts. I found the event. File, Cobalt Compliance July PDF deleted, 2:12 a.m. User, D. Elliott at CompanyCom, access level. Director, Daniel Elliott, Director of Operations. A man so allergic to accountability, he once blamed his assistant for filtering out the wrong vendor emails, even though she'd been on maternity leave for 3 months. I'd seen his name on procurement approvals that didn't line up, but now I had proof. He'd logged in at 2:12 a.m., accessed the file, and hard deleted it from the source drive. No archive, no flag, just vapor. I stared at the screen for a long time. The office was quiet. The fake ficus tree in the corner swayed from the A/C draft. My throat felt dry, not from fear, from rage. They weren't covering mistakes. They were engineering them. That was the night I bought the fireproof safe. I ordered it from an industrial supplier that catered to gun owners and doomsday preppers. Felt appropriate. I cleaned out the bottom of my linen closet, drilled the anchors into the concrete slab, and sealed my first set of off-site files into 2 waterproof folders, one marked Evo Tech and one labeled Cobalt Ghosts. Then I printed a third, just blank, labeled it Blackout. I didn't know what would go in there yet, but I could feel it coming. From then on, every time someone edited a vendor file, I saved the before and after. Every time someone changed contract language last minute, I pulled the diff logs and timestamped the IP. I bought a second USB key and clipped it to the inside of my purse. A third went into the lining of my work tote, right under the stitching. People started calling me paranoid. I started smiling more. That's the thing about being the compliance officer no one listens to. You get to be invisible. And when you're invisible, no one checks your printer queue. No one questions your off hours. No one notices when you quietly rename files with versions that don't sync to the cloud. They'd already decided I was harmless. I decided I'd let them think that, because if they were willing to kill a federal audit file, they'd be willing to do worse. But I had something they didn't. Time, silence, and one hell of a paper trail. And that trail was about to lead straight into a name I thought was buried 3 years ago. But like rot under drywall, it always comes back. There are names you forget, accounting firms, middle managers, even exes if you drink enough bourbon and avoid old playlists. And then there are names that embed themselves in your brain like a splinter under a fingernail. Norvale Industries was one of those names. I first saw it 3 years ago, buried in a government debarment list that I printed out and taped to the inside of my supply cabinet like it was a mugshot lineup. Norvale had been flagged for procurement fraud, duplicate invoicing, falsified labor records, and a shell company tangle that took a full forensic audit team 6 months to unravel. They weren't just dirty. They were radioactive. At the time, I highlighted them in red and moved on, assuming no one in their right mind would touch them again. But I guess no one in our executive team had ever been accused of being in their right mind. It was a rainy Wednesday. I remember because the building had that wet carpet stench, and the HVAC had gone full sauna mode. I was combing through a procurement update for an upcoming bid package, routine stuff, meant to be dry as toast. I almost skipped the last page, which had a single addendum C. Subcontractor revisions, note stapled sideways like an afterthought. That's when I saw it. Subcontractor, Norvale Industries LLC, filed under a fresh EIN. Same mailing address as the debarred entity. Different logo, but the same font, the same smug layout. Like a disguise a 5-year-old would wear, a mustache and a fake name written in crayon. My stomach did this slow, sinking dip. Like when you realize the noise under your car isn't a pothole, it's the axle giving up. Someone had swapped in Norvale under a last-minute contract amendment. Filed at 11:58 p.m. on a Friday night. The original vendor was scrubbed, the approval chain rerouted. The whole paper trail smelled like gas station sushi, hasty, suspicious, and destined to cause internal bleeding. I didn't speak, didn't even stand up. I just sat there, staring at the screen, letting the rage simmer into something sharp and clean. This wasn't negligence anymore. This was coordination, and whoever had done it wasn't even trying that hard to hide. I opened a fresh document. Title, Sequence X inside, a single table. 5 columns, date, contract, vendor, irregularity, source, evidence. I started with Norvale, added Evo Tech, then pulled up the cache of approvals I'd been saving for months, discrepancies in invoice dates, director overrides that didn't match meeting logs, vendor applications with metadata showing edits from internal IPs. It was like discovering you'd been living in a house with a cracked foundation and realizing someone had been chiseling at it from below. I added one more column, risk tier. Norvale got a triple red tag and I circled it. The weight of it all made my arms feel heavy. I minimized the file, took a breath, and unlocked my secondary terminal. This one wasn't monitored. It ran through a private VPN, bounced through 3 remote shells, and had a single purpose: connecting me to the people who actually gave a damn. I typed a secure message through an encrypted channel. The recipient was someone I hadn't spoken to in years. Karen D. Subject: flagged subcontractor possible violation message. Norvale Industries re-entered active contract. See attachment. Are they on your radar? I hit send. Didn't expect much. Maybe a canned auto-response, maybe radio silence. What I got was an instant ping, like a bullet ricocheting off metal. Agent R reply: we've been watching that name too, talk to me. My breath caught, not because I was scared, because I realized I wasn't alone. There was a rhythm to corporate decay. First came denial, that's not possible. Then dismissal, you're overreacting. Then disdain, why can't you just focus on your role? But now we were entering the phase where outside forces start taking an interest. Pulled up Sequence X again, started color coding based on frequency of contact. Norvale showed up in 3 overlapping contracts, all connected to Project Cobalt, all signed off within days of each other. One even had a placeholder signature from our CFO's executive assistant, who was out of the country when it was filed. I dug deeper. Norvale's registered agent had an address that matched a consulting firm our founder used for strategic partnerships. I pulled the incorporation records. The signature, a stylized M, just like the one Greg Marsh scrawled on bar napkins when he thought he was being clever. That night, I didn't sleep, not out of fear, out of focus. I started building a timeline, cross-referenced deleted files, mapped vendor swaps by date. Every time I found a ghost contract or a fake vendor, I added another row to Sequence X. The document grew, not wildly, just steadily, like ivy climbing the side of a condemned building. And I knew if I could see it, they could see it. The feds. The question wasn't if they were coming, it was when. And the next morning, Greg announced the company's largest contract yet, a federal infrastructure deal worth $180 million. Vendor list included Norvale Industries, front and center. It was like watching a drunk man light a match in a fireworks factory and ask, what's the worst that could happen? So I smiled, and I pressed send again. By the time August rolled around, I'd perfected the art of invisibility. I wore beige, I nodded more. I stopped correcting people when they mispronounced my name or accidentally left me off email chains. When the founder passed me in the hall and called me sweetheart, I smiled like a sedated flight attendant. They thought I'd given up. Good. I was done trying to be heard. I wasn't here to warn anyone anymore. I wasn't a compliance officer. I was a historian, an undertaker, a forensic pathologist documenting a slow-motion corporate autopsy. The shift was subtle. Instead of raising red flags, I logged them. I stopped emailing questions. I started screen recording approvals. Every override of protocol, saved. Every file deleted outside of working hours, logged. I had timestamps down to the millisecond. Vendor revisions, payment discrepancies, ghost signatures, all captured, archived, and synced to 3 separate encrypted drives. One local, one offsite, one cloud. If they wanted to bury anything, they'd have to take down half the internet. And the whole time I played the part. Quiet, agreeable, invisible. The kind of woman who smiled in meetings and brought cookies to morale events. The kind of woman you forgot was in the room until she handed you the summary you didn't realize she had. They thought I was harmless. What I was prepared. Sequence X had ballooned to 122 entries. Each one documented. Each one linked. By now it wasn't just a file, it was a weapon. If I dropped it in the right inbox, the entire board would be squirming under subpoena before they had time to rehearse their "this must be a misunderstanding" faces. And then came the final task. Rick knocked on the edge of my cube, clutching a packet like it was dipped in gold. Karen, he said, breathless with the kind of urgent optimism you only see in someone who's about to ruin their life and doesn't know it, we need you to prep the compliance paperwork for the Cobalt announcement. He handed it over like it was a gift. I took it like it was a corpse. Just make sure it's clean, he added, not quite making eye contact. We've got a press preview next week. Legal's not worried, but better safe than sorry. I nodded, smiled, of course. I had no idea that giving me that assignment was like handing a crime scene to the coroner and asking her to tidy up. I took the packet home. It was thick, hundreds of pages. Most of it boilerplate fluff, contract language, subcontractor declarations, vendor clearances, federal compliance disclosures. But the moment I flipped to the vendor list, I stopped cold. Norvale, Evotech, and 3 new LLCs I didn't recognize, but all traced back to the same P.O. box in Jacksonville. The same address linked to a former procurement officer who retired after a quiet ethics investigation 2 years ago. I started mapping every contract, every signature, every last-minute amendment. I made a timeline and overlaid it with Sequence X. The pattern was no longer suspicious, it was surgical, intentional, and worst of all, traceable. Each company had been swapped in using the same procedural loophole, Form 1427B, which allowed for emergency vendor substitutions during priority-level procurement cycles. Normally, that clause was used during disaster relief contracts. But Greg had discovered that if you flagged a contract as critical infrastructure support, the clause triggered automatically. They were using hurricane relief protocols to install fake subcontractors into federal highway projects. I printed the form, circled the clause, annotated it, fraud trigger point. Then I placed it into a red folder labeled Cobalt Spine, because this wasn't just one bad contract. This was the backbone of our most public-facing, most profitable deal. The one Greg had been hyping on investor calls for months. The one with live cameras coming in, one they were going to announce with cake and champagne. They wanted me to clean it up. What I did was copy every single detail, flag every anomaly, and forward a summary of the red flags anonymously to my federal contact with a subject line that simply read, "Pre-clearance audit?" He replied 10 minutes later, "Got it. Stay quiet. We're almost there. Almost there." I remember sitting back in my chair after reading that, looking at the strip lighting above my desk, listening to the dull hum of a printer spitting out another illusion of legitimacy down the hall. For 5 years, I'd tried to fix it from the inside. Now I was just waiting for the match to drop, and I knew exactly what room it was going to land in. Greg loved theatrics. He strutted into the leadership meeting with the same swagger he used at investor briefings, like a man who just talked the devil into a payment plan. Navy blazer, sleeves rolled up like he'd personally installed every fiber of our digital backbone, grinning like the war was won before the enemy even knew there was a battle. "Ladies and gents," he said, clapping his hands once like a televangelist mid-sermon, "I present to you Project Cobalt." He clicked a button, and the projector flashed up a slick graphic: digital highways, infrastructure overlays, the kind of futuristic crap you'd see in a failed Kickstarter video. Everyone oohed and awed like we'd just discovered electricity. Greg stood at the front, basking in it. 200 million in federal infrastructure, he said, pointing at the chart. "We are now officially Tier 1 contractors." Applause broke out. I clapped too, quiet, measured, because I knew something they didn't. I'd already seen the guts of Cobalt. They'd asked me to clean it, dress it up, make it look federally compliant. And now, here he was, raiding it around like a purebred show dog, without realizing it had fleas, mange, and one very aggressive bite. The screen flashed again, this time showing a high-level vendor architecture. Most of the names were familiar, large firms, safe firms, firms with full audit trails. But dead in the middle of the stack, like a bullet wound beneath a tuxedo, was KLM Holdings. I froze. KLM Holdings wasn't just suspicious. It was radioactive. I'd flagged it in Sequence X 2 months ago under a different contract. Shorter timeline, smaller budget, same dirty fingerprints. No website, no tax records. Registered to a residential property that Google Maps showed as a cracked driveway and a busted lawn chair. But most damning, KLM Holdings had been connected to Norvale Industries through a shared IP address and a subcontracting shell agreement buried under 2 layers of consulting fees. And here it was, front and center, Cobalt's data relay partner. I opened my laptop, minimized the presentation window, and pulled up Sequence X. Entry 123 contract, Project Cobalt vendor, KLM Holdings irregularity, shell firm W/shared IP Norvale, evidence, subcontract files 048B, internal routing logs annotation, violation probable. I didn't tremble. I didn't breathe heavy. I didn't even blink. That's the thing about dread, it doesn't yell. It whispers. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the vendor name glowing on the screen. I'd warned them. I'd built the file. I'd watched this exact scenario build itself like a Jenga tower made of lies and whiteboards, and now it was live. I opened my secure messaging terminal, the one I used only for him. Typed 6 words, KLM in Cobalt, live confirmation, sent. I went back to nodding as Greg blathered about synergy and vertical execution like he'd swallowed a LinkedIn word generator. Beside me, the director of strategic ops leaned over and whispered, "This is going to change everything." "Yeah, no kidding," my terminal pinged. "Reply, is it live?" I replied with one sentence, "Yes, and unprotected." The 3 dots flickered, then stopped. No further reply, didn't need one. Unprotected was the keyword we'd agreed on months ago, back when he warned me that documentation was one thing, but active execution of fraudulent contracts? That was an entirely different tier of enforcement. Once the project launched, once real funds and systems moved through those vendor channels, it shifted from potential fraud to live violation. The kind of thing federal agents didn't just investigate, they seized. I minimized the window, clicked back into the Cobalt deck just in time to see Greg bragging about how compliance had done a full scrub. He gestured toward the back where I sat. "Our very own Karen," he said with a smirk, gave it the full thumbs up. The room laughed. I smiled politely, like someone whose seatbelt just clicked shut right before a crash. I didn't speak. I didn't flinch. I just opened Sequence X again, added the timestamp, and scrawled one last note across the top of the page. "He thinks it's clean." Underneath that, "Not for long." They wanted to parade this monster into the world like it was a gift to American infrastructure? Fine, but they forgot who tied the ribbon, and I kept the receipt. They booked the auditorium across from HQ for the big unveiling. Not the internal conference room where HR holds its therapy-light trust circle meetings, but the full glossy venue with a proper stage, a podium, and those awful stackable chairs that make your back ache like you've aged 20 years by slide 3. That was the level we were playing at now. Project Cobalt was no longer just a pitch, it was a spectacle. Word was, the press might be there, some regional outlets, a whisper of someone from a federal committee. Greg had even hinted that a congressman might drop in remotely. He said it with that self-satisfied lilt that suggested he already had a press release written for the imaginary handshake. 2 days before the event, Rick sent me a Slack message so transparently condescending it practically came with a forehead pat. Rick, Karen, can you work on prepping internal docs for the Cobalt event? Just background compliance stuff. Don't worry about speaking, just coordinate logistics. Smiling face with smiling eyes. That smiley face was the professional equivalent of a spit in the eye. I replied, of course, and closed the chat window. Then I backed up every file on Sequence X to a fresh encrypted drive. Labeled it Cobalt Deadman. I had 3 backups already, this made 4. One went into my safe, one into my glove box. One I shipped overnight to a friend across the state with instructions to open only if something happens to me. I thought I was being dramatic. I didn't care. I checked timestamps, cross-referenced approval logs one final time, and updated the sequence. Entry 127 through 135 were all about Cobalt. Each one a flag, each one a documented irregularity that alone would raise an eyebrow. Together, they were a roadmap to criminal prosecution. At this point, I wasn't even scared. I was steady, ice cold. When they stop listening to your voice, you learn to weaponize your silence. On the morning of the all-hands, I got in early. Not early like Greg, who strutted in late to maximize attention. I mean early, 7:12 a.m., coffee in hand, wearing my invisible uniform, gray slacks, cream sweater, hair tied back like I was prepping a lecture on tax reform. No flair, no threat. I had the external drive tucked into the inner lining of my laptop bag under the pen pouch. I taped a business card with my lawyer's number to the outside, just in case. Redundant? Maybe, but I didn't come this far to trust chance. The AV team was already setting up. Big screen, light cues, wireless mics. Greg liked a big stage and a hot mic. He was pacing in the front row, rehearsing his lines to no one in particular. We didn't just bid for Cobalt, we earned it. We didn't just meet compliance standards, we set them. He threw in pauses for applause that hadn't happened yet. The room started to fill. Department heads, team leads, 2 of the VPs who hadn't spoken to me in over a year unless something needed to be signed and sanitized. I sat 3 rows from the back, far right, the seat closest to the exit, just in case. My phone buzzed once. A message from an unlisted number, standing by, that was all it said. No name, no context, but I knew exactly who it was. The contact, the one person outside the company who actually understood what was about to go down, and what it would mean. Greg climbed onto the stage around 8:55, still smoothing his sleeves. The projector flicked on. First slide, Project Cobalt Federal Innovation for Tomorrow. He tapped the mic, smiled wide, and began, "Good morning, everyone. Today marks the future." I glanced down at my laptop, already open on my knees, fingers hovering over the secured messaging app. Not yet, soon. I closed my eyes for one breath, one moment. In then out. When I opened them, I wasn't a compliance officer anymore. I was the fuse, and Greg was about to light the wrong match. Greg was mid-pitch when it happened. The big crescendo slide behind him read restoring America's backbone like we were single-handedly rebarring the nation's soul. He was 3 metaphors deep into a speech clearly written by someone who thought acronyms were emotional currency. COBLT, contracting, optimization, build-out, alignment, leadership, transformation, he said like he'd just discovered fire and wanted everyone to know he'd filed a patent. I raised my hand. Not fast, not disruptive. Just slow, steady, like someone with a clarifying question at a book club meeting. I knew it would catch him off guard. I never spoke at these things. Greg paused, squinted into the crowd like he wasn't sure if I was real. "Yes, Karen," he said, tilting his head like a game show host who knew the answer but was humoring the contestant anyway. "Regarding KLM Holdings," I said, voice clear, no quiver, "can you confirm that their reinstatement was officially vetted through the Federal Subcontractor Clearinghouse?" Silence. You could feel it. Like a soundproof wall suddenly dropped in the middle of the room. No shuffling papers. No throat clears, just quiet. Greg blinked, that fake, slow blink he did when someone asked a question he didn't like but didn't yet know how to crush. Then he chuckled, not kindly, not nervously, just enough to let you know a punchline was coming and you were its target. He leaned into the mic, smiled wide. "Sweetheart," he said, "stick to the paperwork. Let the men handle business." The room erupted in laughter. Not everyone, sure, but enough. A dozen voices, maybe more, a snort from someone in finance, a full belly laugh from marketing. Someone near the front whispered, "Savage like this was a roast and not a $200 million federal contract built on fraud." I didn't laugh. I didn't flinch. I just blinked once and said quietly, "Thank you," before lowering my hand and opening my laptop. I moved with purpose, each keystroke landing like a countdown. Clicked the secure comms icon. Logged in through my triple-layer VPN chain. Accessed the channel labeled Vermilion Contingency. Typed 2 words, proceed now. Sent, nothing flashy, no alarms, no gasps, just a blinking cursor and a clock ticking in my chest like a metronome made of ice. I closed the lid, looked back at Greg. He was back to his script, smirking through buzzwords like transformational compliance and integrity-forward execution. The words landed flat now. Dead things with plastic smiles. Because the moment he said it, the moment he used that line, he'd crossed the last threshold. Not just sexist, not just smug, publicly dismissive of a federal flag. He didn't know that room was being monitored. He didn't know that language, let the men handle business. It's going to show up in a transcript reviewed by 3 agencies that did not think fraud was cute when wrapped in misogyny. I checked my phone. No response yet, didn't need one. They wouldn't answer me again unless it was to say, we're inside. Greg finished the presentation to applause. Thunderous. Hollow. He posed for a selfie with the project slide behind him. 2 VPs gave him that double shoulder clap you save for weddings and IPOs. Didn't see me pack my bag. Didn't notice me walking out. Didn't feel the ground shift under his feet, but it was moving. Quiet, absolute. I stepped out into the sunlight, crisp October air in my lungs, hands steady as a heart monitor line. Somewhere, 3 agents were reviewing the live transcript. Somewhere, the unprotected vendor channel was being traced, logged, matched to sequence X. Somewhere, someone was unlocking a box labeled authorization warrant. And Greg had just turned the key. The agents didn't kick down the door. They didn't shout. There were no sirens, no flashing lights, no Hollywood dramatics. Just 3 people in clean suits and colder eyes, walking through the glass lobby like they'd been invited. Their badges flashed once at reception, too fast for most to catch, just slow enough for the security guard to sit up straighter and fumble his coffee. It had been 58 minutes since I sent the message. It arrived on minute 61. I was in the break room, stirring powdered creamer into the coffee that tasted like burnt regret, when I heard the front door's sensor chime. Then a silence too sharp for an office on a Tuesday. The agents moved with purpose, 2 men and 1 woman, all business and no small talk. They bypassed the front desk, past the welcome banners still bragging about the Cobalt milestone, and headed straight to the elevator bank. By the time I got back to my desk, legal was already summoned to conference room 4C. IT followed, 3 of them in tow, clutching laptops like shields. Slack stopped chirping. That's always the first sign. In a tech office, silence isn't peace, it's panic wearing loafers. I sat down, breathed, opened a blank spreadsheet, started typing budget codes, just enough to look normal. From the corner of my eye, I saw Greg step out of his office. His face was the color of printer paper, not the warm kind. The bleached kind, too bright, too fake. He saw the agents, stopped walking, turned toward the ops director who was halfway through a frozen stare. What is this? Greg asked, voice tight. One of the agents turned, flashed the badge again, said nothing. The one in the lead, a woman in a navy suit with a file folder tucked neatly under her arm, spoke to HR, then pointed toward the server room. And that's when the panic hit. The project servers weren't on cloud. For security reasons, Cobalt's infrastructure was still local, stored on a set of racks in a temperature-controlled room down the hall from legal. Redundant only on paper. Greg insisted on proprietary access so he could maintain oversight, which now meant federal oversight. 2 agents and the head of IT disappeared into the server room. The 3rd agent stood near the door, watching. Breathing. Listening, I kept typing. Budget code 843X, Project Nexus, vendor, Clearwater Dynamics, fake entry. I didn't care. I was typing the sound of innocence. Greg disappeared into conference room 4C. The door slammed. Someone inside knocked over a chair. Through the glass, I could see the lead agent open the folder. Sequence X printed, page after page of annotated irregularities. My handwriting in the margins. I looked away. That's when I heard it, not shouted, not dramatized. Just spoken quietly, calmly, with the kind of finality that rearranges the molecules in your bloodstream. She's protected, right? My breath caught, not from fear, from relief. The voice came from the agent in the hallway. He'd been scanning the room, his gaze moving past each employee until it landed momentarily on me. Another agent from inside the room answered, not even glancing up. She's red-tagged and cleared. Don't touch her, not don't arrest. Not don't question, don't touch, like I was fireproof. I went back to typing, one line, then another, letting the sound of keys fill the air while the building crumbled from the inside. Down the hallway, IT sprinted to fetch the backup drives. Someone from public affairs was already crying. Slack lit up for half a second. Someone posted a confused question in #general. And then it went offline entirely. Greg burst out of 4C, phone to his ear, jaw tight enough to crack molars. I don't care what the contract says, he was saying. They can't just walk in, and he stopped when he saw the server room door wide open. An agent stepped out, holding a sealed evidence bag. Greg locked eyes with him. The kind of look you give someone who just unplugged your life support. I kept typing. Somewhere in the building, someone printed a list of access credentials. Somewhere. Legal was deleting Slack history they didn't know was already mirrored. Somewhere, the backbone of Project Cobalt was being loaded into a chain of custody briefcase. And me? I filed vendor logs, quietly, efficiently, just like they'd trained me to do. Conference room B had always felt too cold. Over-air-conditioned, sterile, like a dentist's office trying to pass as a think tank. The blinds were drawn now. Lights dimmed. A legal pad sat untouched at each seat, flanked by bottles of water no one would drink. You could smell it in the air, something had ruptured. I was summoned by name, not an invite, not a request. A short, firm directive from the lead agent as she stood in the hallway flanked by legal, IT, and a suddenly ashen-faced VP of operations. Miss Karen's last name, please come with us. I stood, calm, slow. My heartbeat was steady, methodical, almost bored. I'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. Not in the mirror, in silence, in stillness, like a diver waiting to break the surface. The door to 4C had already been closed behind Greg. Now he was being moved to B, where the decisions were made, where the explanations ran dry. Inside, the table was already half-filled. Legal counsel, director of finance, IT security. Rick looked like someone had hit Control plus Alt plus Del on his soul. Greg was sitting at the head of the table, blazer off. Collar loosened, hair slightly damp like he'd either sprinted up the stairs or started to sweat from a place deeper than skin. I took my seat at the far end, didn't speak. Didn't look at anyone but the folder. It sat on the table like a loaded weapon. White, thick, labeled in bold marker. Sequence X, the lead agent, her badge now resting beside her phone like a quiet threat, opened the folder. Inside, tables, charts, handwritten annotations, email printouts, metadata logs, access timestamp screenshots. Audit trails matched to deleted files. One photo showed a whiteboard with contract routing arrows. Another showed a Slack exchange between Greg and a procurement lead, joking about speedrunning the compliance checklist. Every page told a story, and every story pointed in one direction. She slid the folder across the table, stopping just short of Greg. This sequence of documented irregularities, she said, her voice measured, created by Miss Karen's last name, matches the pattern of active fraud currently under federal investigation. Greg didn't move at first, didn't blink, just stared at the folder like it had grown teeth. His lips parted slightly like his mouth was searching for a phrase, but his brain had already left the building. Finally, he looked at me, really looked. All the swagger was gone, no marketing polish, no visionary gleam, just a man cornered by the receipts he thought would never be printed. You, he started, voice low, you did this? I didn't gloat, didn't monologue, just smiled, small, clean like a closing signature. You asked me to stick to the paperwork, I said. I did, that was it. No music swelled, no applause came, just silence, thick as wet cement. A second agent stood, stepped outside, and waved. Moments later, two more entered, carrying sealed evidence boxes and a mobile drive enclosure. A third rolled in a printer log, not digital, paper, old school, the kind no one thinks to check. Greg looked at the pages again, eyes darting like he could somehow will the ink to rearrange. He looked smaller now, not just physically. Diminished. A man seeing, for the first time, the consequence of believing his empire was bulletproof just because he built it on invisible ink. Legal leaned over and whispered something to him. He didn't respond, didn't even hear her. I stood. No one stopped me, not the agents, not legal, not Greg. I walked out of the room, down the hall, past the reception desk that still had a bowl of mints and a fake orchid someone forgot to dust. Out into the autumn air, brisk and unapologetic. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Slow, deep, full, somewhere behind me. Greg was learning what a compliance trigger felt like in real time. Somewhere, Sequence X was being dissected by federal attorneys with no patience for buzzwords. And somewhere, someone was opening a file and muttering. This started with one woman who wouldn't shut up about paperwork. Cut to black. Thanks for watching, you cubicle warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're my old boss, then you're on your own. Revenge of the Coffee Pot strikes again.